So there we go. All right. So yeah, when Lars and Bron approached me about just coming and doing a keynote, Lars suggested maybe I, talk about entity framework. I'm like, well, that's a little specific. Maybe, maybe I can share a little bit of wisdom. And actually, as we were talking about it back and forth, I realized there had been something that had been bothering me. And I thought that if this was worrying to me, it's probably worrying to a lot of other developers, which is the AI coding tools, right? And where is that going to leave me? And at my veteranship, I actually had really been thinking, thank goodness I am like near the far end of my career, then maybe I don't have to worry about this because like I don't even know. But because I was worrying about this and thinking about it, I said, oh, well, I guess I'll do a keynote on that. I had not ever used GitHub CoPilot. I had not ever used ChatGPT. I hadn't done anything because I was really afraid of AI. So it's been a big, and I'm not here to teach you to be a GitHub CoPilot expert. I'll just warn you about that right now. So that's what I'll be talking about. Let's see, are we communicating with my thing? Oh, yeah, communicating with my thing. So this might be for some of you who are, kind of more my age group, but we've been hearing and thinking about AI for a long time, right? Whether it was real or just fantasy. Is everybody here pretty much familiar with Space Odyssey? If you haven't seen it, at least you know about HAL. So HAL was the computer on the spaceship, and HAL was amazing until HAL became terrifying because HAL became sentient. Right? So this is, a lot of some of the conversation around AI in general right now. Luckily, we also, I really need to, okay, thank you. We do at least get some things about AI that make us laugh. Like, I don't know if everybody saw this. It was about a month ago when Air Canada got into big trouble because their chatbot was giving bad advice to people, and it cost them a lot of money because they were saying, oh yeah, you can get this huge refund, even though that was not the policy. So they decided to honor that. So that was fun. We got to laugh about that. Ha ha, the chatbots are stupid, and, and it's expensive. But there's actually a lot of stuff about AI that isn't laughable. Some of the scary things that people are already doing, like, they can do AI voice, take somebody's voice and make it say anything they want. Like, so there's this, all of this stuff. It's just like the gift that keeps on giving. Every day I go, on the internet, on Twitter, I will always call it Twitter, more and more conversations and articles about these questions. So, one thing that I think a lot of us hear a lot is some of the racial bias and all kinds of different bias that's seeping into AI, right, because of the models they're training it on. And we see that all the time. This one was, about the chatbots. Remember Tay, Microsoft's little chatbot from a few years ago that people were training it really quickly to say terrible, terrible things? And this was actually just a couple of weeks ago, some research coming out of Cornell University where they're saying even people's dialect, the way people speak, AI is judging them on that and making recommendations or not recommendations about that, just from somebody's accent or the way they speak. And like I said, the gift that keeps on giving. This just popped up in my my inbox a couple of days ago. Among the AI doomsayers, some people are saying AI is going to save the planet, and some people are saying AI is going to like murder us all. And even on the plane coming over here, I was looking through the movies to see what movie I wanted to watch, on the 15-hour leg. And there was a movie about needing to kill the AI architect because, some things that that programmer had done with AI kind of led to some bad things. So we've been hearing a lot about machine learning and data science, and that's been around for, I think really available to us as developers at conferences and everything for, like 10 or 15 years. And everybody I knew who was doing machine learning and data science was like a PhD in math. And I felt a little more like this. So again, I kind of ignored it. I tried a little bit. I would go to, maybe talks. I didn't go to this summit, but I just wanted to point out, this is all the way back in 2012, right? That AI is really big discussion now. People are really doing it. But what people were doing at that point was leveraging the machine learning and the data science to build AI, to build, applications and things that would, make magic for us in our lives. So I found this like, I have to understand some of this, right? So I would go to like these getting started with AI talks at conferences, and I would learn that AI can't really distinguish between a dog and a blueberry muffin. Or I would learn that AI could not distinguish between a dog and a mop. But one thing I learned that was kind of useful was that in my phone, my iPhone, it actually has AI built into it, which is how we can do this search. So I can even now search on Josie, which is my dog's name, and it pulls up pictures of that dog, even though I have pictures of lots of dogs in my phone, and also things that have her name on it in text, even saw like the little bottle of ear medicine, right? So that's pretty amazing. So maybe I wasn't going to build things with AI, but I can certainly take advantage of AI. It's there in my life. And now AI is totally available to us with so many tools that even if we're not going to be building with it, we're not going to be building AI tools and AI sentient computer software and devices and things like that, we can still take advantage of it. This slide, I think, came from about it's like at least a year old. And this is all Gen AI tooling that's available to us already. So Gen AI is really coming for the masses. So, these are the kinds of very brilliant things people are doing with Gen AI, right? They're creating crazy images. Actually, I think it's a little harder to do something like that now because they're trying to build protections in so you can't use, real people. But yeah, there were a lot of people who thought that was for real. And then everybody on Facebook was posting Gen AI images of their pets. So I was like, well, how are they doing that? So with Bing Create, they actually have a relationship with DALL-E 3 now. And so I was like, okay, so I upload a picture of Josie and then it makes no, it doesn't work that way. You have to just do a description. So I really tried. I was really like going, okay, well, this is good, but she's got a smaller head, or this is that. So it was, that's just a cute Newfoundland, not nearly as cute as Josie. No, nobody's as cute as Josie. So this, but I started playing with it, and only literally since Lars asked me to do this keynote, when I really started doing more and more things, just experimenting with it. And I saw somebody had done this for an internal session that I'd seen, and he had a video of him talking, but he said it was totally Gen AI driven. So I found out how he did it. He used something called Hey Gen, which is a really new technology, not free because it's a big deal. And what you do is you do a training video. So that was me, stood in front of the camera and talked for 2 minutes. I read like an article on Docker, right? Like that I'd just written. So what I'm saying here is not what I recorded in the video. So after it has the training video, then I type in like a paragraph I want it to say. And this is the result of that, combining the training video and then just some text I typed in. And then after I did that, I said, translate this to, pick from a language, translate this to Chinese. Okay, now do the same thing in Chinese. So now I'm a fluent Chinese speaker.
A little creepy. I used an AI tool called HeyGen that allowed me to record a 2-minute video, and I just read text from an article I wrote about Docker.
好吧，这有点令人毛骨悚然。我使用了一个名为 HeyGen 的 AI 工具，它允许我录制2分钟的视频，并且
super cool, but super terrifying, right? Like if somebody got hold of my training video or my login for HeyGen, who knows what they would be able to come up with. Anyway, so, we have all this Gen AI, and then they came for our code. And this was what freaked me out, and I'm sure a lot of people. I've been programming and designing software and designing systems for over 30 years. And I was like, is that it? Is all this AI, the Gen AI and the GitHub CoPilot and ChatGPT, is that going to be the end of my career? Have other people had these dooming thoughts also? I'm curious. Anybody? One person worried about it? No, a few more, yeah. So there are a lot of people worrying about it. So, I've got this in the back of my mind and hearing this all the time, AI is going to kill coding. And flipping through New Yorker magazine, I saw this article, "A Coder Considers the Waning Days of the Craft." So I started reading it, and the author is kind of like me, about my age, and he's been coding for a really long time, and he was having the same concerns. So I read the article, and I thought his perspective was really interesting. So first of all, he's like, all this stuff is really really handy, and everybody's saying it's amazing how it helps you and everything. But I worked really hard to gain all this experience. I like to take advantage of that, right? Is all of my experience and my knowledge going to be useless now? So he had the exact same concern that I did, and I'm sure many, many people do. And he was working with another developer on a project, like a pet project. And the other developer was, the younger guy, was a little less afraid of, the assistants, didn't have his ego wrapped up in it as much, right? That's a little bit of a part of that, I think. Anyway, this guy, Ben, he was using it, and they were trying to accomplish something. They didn't know how to do it. And instead of Googling for 3 days and trying this and trying that and going down whichever path until they found the right thing, he asked ChatGPT, which got him totally jump-started to dive in and be on the right path right away. And the author of the article is like, well, that was impressive. Oh, that might be useful. That's not taking away my knowledge, that's just helping me out, like going and doing my research for me and doing it like in 3 seconds. So he felt like ready to take advantage of this, and also that it wasn't really going to make him irrelevant. And that was really helpful for me. And so I installed CoPilot, and I'm going to mostly focus on CoPilot. I installed GitHub CoPilot into Visual Studio and just had it there while I was working on some big projects. Just not like, oh, I'm going to be an expert now. I just wanted to see what it would do. So if you're using, just out of curiosity for context, how many people here are .NET developers? So when I'm talking about Visual Studio, and okay, so the bulk of us. So we're used to having help. Right? We already have help. We have IntelliSense, which is really helpful. We have templates, right? You want to create a new web API, it spits out a template, and then you start working on that. We have code snippets, awesome, right? You type prop, it fleshes out a property. You write CTOR, it gives you a constructor. And also our APIs, of course, I have to give a shout out to EF Core API, right? All this, that was kind of, when I thought about that, I was like, I really like the help I get from EF Core. I don't have to write, open connections and create commands and execute the commands, and I don't have to do all that awful, repetitive, boring work, right? So I'm already willing to use things that are helping me. Why wouldn't I be willing to use something like CoPilot? But the more I thought about it and played around with CoPilot, I realized, well, these aren't the same at all, right? Those code snippets, those APIs, those are pre-created code, right? We know what they're going to do. We know what that tooling is. We can look up if they're open source. We can actually look and see the code. It's very different than the Gen AI code, because the Gen AI code is going and reading all kinds of code, like with GitHub CoPilot, all kinds of open source code on GitHub, and then kind of, figuring out something from there. That's very different, because we don't know where that code's coming from. We don't have, my friends on the Entity Framework core team writing this brilliant stuff that I know I can rely on. We don't know how much we can trust it. So it really is different, although just the idea I do like taking advantage of having some help when I'm coding. So we want to talk a little bit about, just for comparison, and also, how many people here are actually already using CoPilot or ChatGPT? Okay, cool. So maybe when it's time to do some of these demos, I'll get one of you to help me, because I am no expert. So there's a big difference between what we're used to and what this is. So we've got IntelliSense. IntelliSense is, it's just in there. It's just in Visual Studio. And, depending on the extensions you have in Visual Studio Code, it's just there. There's no AI being used, and it has some very specific capabilities, like, string dot. It gives you all of the possible methods and functions that you might want to be that come with string, right? So it's very, very specific, and it's just saves you a little bit of typing, but it's pretty helpful. Now, IntelliCode came along in Visual Studio 2022, like a year or two ago. Was it in 2022 or 2020? Anyway, that also it was just there. As long as you have your license for Visual Studio, it was there. And now we also have, you can install an extension in Visual Studio Code, and JetBrains, does JetBrains write or no? I don't think there was a big kerfuffle about that. But it's there and it's free. But this uses AI. So this was like the precursor to what we're seeing with GitHub CoPilot. But it uses the source code the open source code from GitHub. The engine and the processing came out of Microsoft Research. So it's very, very much a Microsoft tool. And it works all on your machine, right? And the kinds of things that it does is single line code completion, and then argument completion, member completion. But like with the argument completion, if it's doing a line of code for you, it actually is aware of your variables, and so which ones might make sense. So it actually has some context of what is in your code and kind of combining that with what's in its LLM that's part of IntelliCode. And this is, it's built into Visual Studio. It's an extension for Visual Studio Code. So along comes CoPilot, and it's the same, but very, very different. Like, it's got some similarities to IntelliCode. So it is also using AI. So at first I was saying, okay, AI coding tools in Visual Studio. I thought that was CoPilot. Like, I had to really sort all this stuff out. So CoPilot and IntelliCode are not the same thing. So first of all, CoPilot is not free. There are, you have to pay a subscription fee, and it's tiered for, I think, individuals, like $10 a month. And uses the same source, right, the open source code. It starts with it. That's its default, although it's very customizable. You can do other things with it. But another big difference is this is not using the same engine. This is the collaboration between GitHub, Microsoft, and OpenAI. And I don't know if you remember last year after Microsoft's big tech conference, and everything was all about Copilot everywhere, not just GitHub Copilot, but Copilot everywhere. And then, 2 weeks later, there was the little bit of problem that happened at OpenAPI, right, with the CEO getting fired, and Microsoft, like Microsoft was like, oh, I mean, they have invested billions in there. So anyway, that all got saved. But that's a really big difference. Another big difference is, like, if I'm going to do my demos, I was like, I have to have internet, right? This all gets processed in the cloud. So yes, it does code completion, and that's probably what people are most familiar with, that it'll generate a whole bunch of code for you, but it does a lot more than just code completion, which again was, for me, it was like a real big eye-opener seeing some of this stuff. And with IntelliCode, it basically does the code completion based on what it sees you typing, right? And then it finishes it up. Whereas with CoPilot, you have that, so it's like the context of what's there plus whatever you're typing, and it tries to help you. Although sometimes it can feel like that person who is always finishing your sentences, right? Because it can get in the way, and that's an interesting thing people have been talking about. But you can also write prompts, and there's also CoPilot chat. So these are all different ways of getting help from CoPilot, not just code completion, but other kinds of help. And it's installed by way of extensions, and it has its own logo, right? Big difference. It has a logo. So a little bit about what CoPilot can do for you besides the code completion. And this is just a quick list, and no, I am not going to demo every single one. I was kind of sorry, you know, it's based on your voting, but I was kind of sorry to see that there wasn't a session on CoPilot today, so I could say, just go watch that session. But there's some folks from GitHub here, so maybe they can really do some great demos for you. So besides just doing code completion, you can ask it to do refactoring. You can ask it to fix code. And, you know, like error message will tell you what's wrong, but it can actually say, this is what I would change. Is that okay? And you can do that. You have CoPilot available at the command line. You have CoPilot available when you can have it create commit messages for you, right? So, right, commit message. I've seen, however, it like sometimes will create like a 5-page commit message. So, you know, again, and a lot of that is about learning how to talk to it. Terminal commands, like how do you, I always have to Google how to add a file or a file path into git ignore that I forgot to put up front, right? And now it's being tracked, right? And I always have to Google that. Like, you can actually say, like, how do I do that? And it'll give you the code, and then you can just stick it in your terminal. So all kinds of things like that. Generating documentation, error message help. I was frustrated with that because I saw a little demo of how to take advantage of that, and I wasn't able to duplicate it. But I'm just going to show you a few of these things. In code, not in PowerPoint. Oh, and it got small again. I can't see it very well. Control plus. I need it bigger, even though I'm wearing my glasses. Okay, so I've just got this really simple web API project in C#. This is Visual Studio Code, and I have GitHub. I have a few things, and so I've got GitHub CoPilot, but I also have I'm not going to scroll down. I'm not going to deal with that. I also have GitHub Chat, right? It's a different perspective on CoPilot as opposed to working directly in your code. So if I screwed something up here, like I took, you know, I like forgot the await, and I see a little green squiggly line, something's wrong, which is not showing me right away. Like I would expect it to do that. I can try anyway. So there's a couple of things I can do. I'm going to actually use the prompt, so I'm pressing Control-I, and I'm going to say, oh wait, now I have to highlight this. Right, already the people who've been using it for like 3 years are like, Julie. So I type fix, I'm going to hit the enter, and it's going to propose a fix for the problems in the selected code. So to solve the problem, I would add the await keyword. Right, and if I had looked at errors, it would have said you're missing the await on line such and such. But here I can just go accept, right? So there it fixed that for me. Is that particular thing maybe worth $10 a month? That, you know, I don't know. But it's just all kinds of tiny little things like this, but also big things. This is one of the things that I love, really love. If I go into app settings JSON, right? I'm using SQLite here. But I want to put in SQL Server. Okay, I've been programming for 30 years. Do you think I can write a SQL Server connection string? No, we all have SQLconnections.com on speed dial, right? So I can, so I'll use the prompt. So you can use the prompt or you can use a comment. So create a SQL Server connection and hit enter, and I cross my fingers. No, come on, connection string. See, this is the other thing. Is this what prompt engineers, that new type of, so this, I have done this like 10 times, and it gives me connection strings. But this happens also, right? So this is not taking over my job quite yet. So let's see if it wants to give me more. Come on, come on. So let's see. Try again. No. Maybe because it doesn't like that and it's not compiling. Because I was smart, I knew I needed to have that there. Anyway, it does create SQL Server connection strings, but I don't know freaking how to use it. And I'm going to foreshadow a really funny slide I have, but it's not so funny. A friend of mine tweeted, AI is not going to take over our jobs. People who know how to use it are going to take over our jobs. So yeah, that was a really impressive demo. But yeah, I've done that a million times. So what else? So I have an endpoints class here. Now, I originally created this endpoints class, this actual API. I created it in Visual Studio using templates, right? So I've created a web API project, and then I right-click on the project and say, please add endpoints, because I don't know how to write all that stuff. I'm not a front-end engineer. So I can actually, I have an endpoints class for author. I want one for books also. So normally I would have to, copy and paste this and do all that. So I'm going to go into chat, which is over here. So this is the third, a third way. And I'm going to say create an, excuse me, can I see what I'm typing? Book, watch this won't work also, even though I've done it a million times. Endpoints class. This is the most important part. Sure, here's a basic structure. I like that. Sure, so friendly. For book endpoints class. And it was explaining what it does, what the class does. If I scroll up here, like that's not very useful there, but if I scroll up, click there, insert into a new file, ignore whatever that message is. Right, and it just gives me the basics of what I need, right? So that's pretty cool. And maybe I'm looking at this going, I knew what an endpoints class is, but I really don't understand I'm not a front-end engineer, so I don't really know what this is doing. So I can go back to chat, or if I highlight it, I can do Command-I and say, explain what I highlighted. And over here, it's starting to say, the line of code you're looking at is part of the ASP.NET Core framework, blah, blah, blah. It does this, it does that. This, instead of Googling everything or, and having to filter through so much information. I'll Google stuff, and I'm really careful about whose articles I'm reading. This looks interesting. What is this person's background, right? Did somebody just write this with ChatGPT and they have no idea what they're doing? Does anybody remember? I couldn't find anything about this. I remember last year, somebody published 40 technical programming books on Amazon in a month, and they were all written with ChatGPT. That also made me go, why do I bother? Except people were finally calling them out. Another thing that is really helpful, so here I am. It's not code completion, right? This is really helping me and my workflow. I'm right in here. I'm not going to go over and spend a half an hour Googling and trying to make sure I'm reading good resources to help me understand this. It's getting the context, and it's really giving me some good information without me having to get really disrupted from the work I'm doing. So here's another interesting example. Create a readme.md to document this web API. I practiced these prompts, so it better work. So sure, it likes sure. Here's a basic structure. It's all kinds of useful information specifically about that. It also, I don't have to go and look at the markdown cheat sheet. That's another one I Google a lot. Insert into new file. And there's, just a bit of that in Markdown, and I can get a preview of it if I want, but I'm not going to bother. So there's just a few examples of it's not just about code completion. And let's go back here. Okay, so I installed it in Visual Studio, and started playing with it and got a little comfortable with it. And then I got a little bolder. As you can see, I have it in Visual Studio Code. And then I was like, well, CoPilot's kind of everywhere. Like, what else, how else does it work? So I tried DALL-E 3. You saw those images I did of attempting to do my dog. And then I looked at it in Microsoft 365, in Word, in PowerPoint, just to try to get a feel for what it can do. I am just barely. I mean, there's you read about all of these capabilities, and I have barely touched them. One thing I did was I installed the CoPilot app on iOS, and I was like, I don't know what to ask it. Oh, okay. I'm going to Australia. It's late March. I'm going to be in Melbourne, in the Blue Mountains, and in the Grampians. What should I pack? Don't forget your sunscreen. It kept also saying, don't forget a camera. Don't forget a camera. You want a camera. You want a camera. So that was kind of cool. I also installed ChatGPT iOS app, but I didn't use that. Just not because I'm only using CoPilot. I'm not here to sell anybody on CoPilot. This is just, the path I went down, exploring stuff. I also, with my great experience with getting SQL Server connection strings, which was much greater in my real life than on a stage, I also realized that there's a CoPilot, because Azure Data Studio is basically Visual Studio Code, but just with data stuff in it. So there's a CoPilot extension, GitHub CoPilot extension for that. And I don't know if you've used Azure Data Studio. So it has, it has snippets, right? So I can do a snippet SQL add column, and it will give me this snippet. And then I'm like, okay, if it's not an int, or if it's not null, or if I have the default, I have to remember, it's the same thing. I don't know, 30 years, but I just don't know how to write that code. So with CoPilot, I could just put a prompt, add a Boolean column to assignments table that is not nullable and has default value of false. And it just writes it for me, and I just don't have to think. So that is really useful. And again, it's just, a tiny little thing, not as big of a deal as write that whole class. One thing I really wondered and I wondered about and played with was, oh, I'm going to use CoPilot or ChatGPT to write the perfect iOS game, and I'm going to make $1 million, right? So I was curious how far one would get, create this kind of create code for this game or that game, and it, we'll do a little bit, but that's not what it's for, and I think that's what people fear that it's going to do. I want to make sure you understand a little bit about how this is working, just kind of a trust factor. And starting in the code editor, it uses the context of what my code is and however I prompted it, gathers all that up, sends it through a proxy filter, and it's filtering out bad things, right? So you can't, because it doesn't want to add that into its training model. Sends it up, sends it to the LLMs for OpenAI language models, and then it analyzes what it thinks it should send back, sends back some code for you, does some more filtering on the code using its intelligence, and then sends it back to you, and you decide if you're going to use it or not, and then it takes that information and sends it back so it can learn better, right? So that also sends your, it's not just sending your response back. It might be sending other things back. So that's something also important to understand. So I spent a lot of time reading this stuff to try to make sure I understood. So it does send snippets of your code to GitHub. Now, if you have the enterprise or business subscriptions, it will never, ever keep any of that code. But if you have an individual subscription, you have to opt out of it. And it's not that it's using your code to provide code for other people. It's just more putting it into its machine, its learning and algorithms to just try to help it better, do a better job going down the road. But you have to turn it off if you don't want that to happen. It's not going to send your code back to anybody, right? It'll never send, even if it finds some stuff to help you on GitHub and open source, it's not going to just copy and paste from one project and send you exactly that code. It will definitely never do that. So you don't have to worry about exactly that doing. And they follow responsible practices, and your private code is confidential. But I was really worried about this thing about the snippets. They're discarded, because I was seeing elsewhere that it's saving it, and then it's saying it's not saving it. So you actually, if you're using an individual subscription, that is something you need to do on GitHub in your account, right? It's not something in Visual Studio Code. So we do have these protections, but you need to definitely know what it's going to do by default and what it's not doing. So there's another really important thing, and you will see this everywhere in the CoPilot documentation, which is, we're doing the best we can, right? But this code is coming from all kinds of sources. Don't just take it and not think about what it is. Review the code that CoPilot is putting in your application, right? And a lot of people aren't doing that. But the documentation says it everywhere. You really need to do that. And so I saw this the other day. I saw this alarming headline, right? Like, developers relying on GitHub are doing potentially dangerous code. So first of all, so I read the article, and it was researchers from SNCC. So SNCC creates security software, right? So that is totally their focus. And what they were saying was, if you're just taking everything and not thinking about what its CoPilot is sending back to you, you could create problematic code. But so first of all, for alarming title, right? But then I read that and was like, okay, well, this is what GitHub has said. Like every single thing I've read, they're like, don't do it this way. You have to review the code. You can't just use it. But it was also interesting that they said, if you've already got security practices in your projects when you're using CoPilot, and remember, CoPilot also takes context from the code in your project, so the safer your code is, it's going to learn from that as well. So I thought that was really interesting. But also, conduct manual reviews, comprehensive security assessments. Don't just use the code. So I think that there's really two questions with respect to this question of irrelevancy, like what about today versus in the future? What about our jobs right now? Is CoPilot going to make us irrelevant? So here's Nicole's post, right? It's not going to take your job, but someone knows how to use it is the one who's going to take your job. But after all the time I've been working with it and reading and researching and talking to other people, and with my 30+ years of experience in the software industry, I really do not think that this week, this year, next 5 years, I don't think GitHub CoPilot is going to be replacing your jobs, right? There's so much that we bring to the table that these coding AIs, gens, are not just not going to be able to provide. So I really firmly believe that. And will it benefit us? Well, if you ask GitHub, they're like, oh yeah, but they've done all these studies and research and everything. There's some interesting stuff. So they said they had 95 devs, half and half using CoPilot, not using CoPilot, GitHub CoPilot. And about the same number of people finished the task, but the people who were using CoPilot finished it in less than half the time. So that was really impressive. And it's about productivity, right? So here's another. This is about CoPilot chat specifically, but all this research again, just saying it's really helping people. It's making people more productive, and developers feeling more confident with their code. and 50,000 businesses are already using it. So it is out there, and people are really using it. So I thought, that it's good to have feedback from Microsoft and GitHub on that. This developer preference for CoPilot, that comes from Stack Overflow's survey. So this also, like I said, everything keeps popping up all the time. So eBay did a big pilot on CoPilot with like 300 people, and half using CoPilot and not. And this is a really, really interesting blog post that they wrote. So first, the people who are using it, they used it by default, right? Nothing extra put into it. And what they found there, kind of pros and cons, definitely productivity improvements, but they also found that because of the size of their code base, I mean, it's eBay, right? Because of the size of their code base, CoPilot was having a hard time with that massive amount of code. So the next level they went to was they trained it. This is something you can do with the enterprise, and you need to know a lot about how to do this. But they trained it with their own code base, and then they fine-tuned the language models. And one thing they said about it was interesting is all the libraries that they have to use for, that all of their basic software development relies on, it was so much easier to maintain those, because those still need to, somebody needs to pay attention to those also, the base libraries that they're using. And they said it was so much easier to maintain them with the help of CoPilot once it had been trained. But it was also clear, again, that they really need to customize it and fine-tune it in order to be able to do that. And then for chat, they used their internal docs they added the internal docs in as the source of responses that the chat part is going to give us, right? Like, what does this mean? Where will I find the code? What's the source of it? How does it work? I don't understand. So that was huge for them. But also every once in a while they would still get like ridiculous answers from it. So in addition to today, we also want to think about tomorrow. And this is where you see the stuff that's a little more unnerving. So for example, here's the CEO of NVIDIA. This was a recent big international summit he was speaking at, and he's saying students today, so not us, but people who are coming up, they don't need to learn to code. They just need to learn, whatever they want. If they want to learn to be a doctor, they want to learn about medicine, they want to learn about law, whatever industry they want to understand, that's what they should learn about, and they won't have to write any code. And that was really unnerving, right? He's like, as long as you understand the domain, and here I am, like, I do a lot with domain-driven design. I feel very strongly about the importance of understanding your domain. But we still need to design systems, and we still need to understand how the domains work and how information flows and business rules and all that kind of stuff that, somebody who has studied medicine, like somebody who's a doctor, they're pretty smart to be able to do that. But they're not going to understand that kind of systems thinking. So it's a little concerning that he thinks that. But then the discussion that followed on this was, is he saying AI coding, A is going to kill coding, or yeah, you need to, buy our processors because we're building AI into it. So he's just, going for the bottom line there. And Grady Booch also chimed in on this, and basically said the same thing about systems thinking and like he was basically saying that's a ridiculous concept. He's not a naysayer about AI, but just to, don't go crazy. Actually, if you look at that eBay blog, you can find it on eBay. Look up eBay tech blogs. Their summary was really interesting. I'm not going to read it just because of the time, but they were saying, be careful. There's so much. It's overwhelming how much discussion there is around AI, and especially so much of it is marketing right now too, because everybody's trying to get on the bandwagon to make a buck, like sell their NVIDIA coprocessor or whatever. I'm an AI expert. So there's so much and they said it can be deafening, right? And there's a lot there, a lot that we can benefit from. So, don't overlook it, but look at it with a critical eye. And Grady Booch is somebody who a lot of us trust his perspective on things like that. So some other things about the future that you see that's a little scary. I don't know if anybody's heard of these. Magic.dev. So GitHub in their documentation, they say it's a co-pilot, not an autopilot, right? Don't just let it do everything. And now magic.dev, which doesn't quite exist yet, but and I saw Nat Friedman, who was from, that's how I saw this. There was a discussion about this because he's an investor in that, right? Nat was the CEO of GitHub. He's an investor in this. But they say, we're going to build a co-worker, not just a co-pilot, right? That makes you nervous. And then there's this other one. This just started bubbling up like on my radar in the last week. Devin, right? Devin.io. And Devin.io is not going to be a co-pilot. It's going to be a software engineer. And I saw somebody on Twitter the other day saying, I kept seeing all this stuff about Devin. I thought he was like a YouTube influencer or something, right? And then, no, it turns out it's like some AI bot that's going to, it's going to do coding without like anybody with a real brain and real experience guiding them. So I don't know, like what our kids are going to be doing when they're, where they're living in the world, in the future world. But, maybe down the road, right? Maybe Copilot, I hope Copilot's probably not going to get sentient, right, and take over. But, I cannot predict the future, but I think today, this week, this year, our careers now, and for the 10-year-olds in the room, I'm not speaking to you because I don't know what your future is going to be, but for us, I do not think we need to worry about being irrelevant, and all of our experience and everything we're bringing to the table is not going to just fizzle out because something like Copilot is just going to go ahead and take over our jobs for us. So we don't have to worry about this cute little guy taking away our jobs. And now I feel way better about it, and that was what I wanted to share with you today. So thank you very much.